G'day, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us once again for another episode of the Big Bad Brad Show MMA edition. My name is Brad Williams, and every single week we aim to provide you with a fan's eye view of the sport of mixed martial arts from way up the back in the cheap seats. This week is episode 10. We've officially turned the big 1-0. I decided to celebrate by taking out everyone that works on the show for drinks, but it's pretty much me. I'm the only person that works on the show, so really I just went and had a couple of beers at the beach, but it was better than any work Christmas party I've ever been to, so that's something. We've got stacks to get into this week, so we're going to jump straight into it. Before we move forward, we are going to take a quick look back at last week's UFC Fight Night Rotterdam. It turned out to be a cracking night of fights. It was just sensational, pretty much from top to bottom. It had everything. We had Kyoji Horiguchi picking up a unanimous decision over Neil Seery. Reza Madadi scored a TKO over Jan Cabral. When we moved to the main card, local product Jermaine Durandame picked up a TKO finish. And then we moved to the pointy end and some really important fights. And the first one we're going to talk about was Gunnar Nelson and Albert Tumenov. Gunnar Nelson has been a little bit hit and miss of late, and this was his chance to bounce back over a really, really tough opponent in Albert Tumenov, and he did just that. He ended up really just picking him to pieces and ultimately picked up the submission via rear naked choke. This was really Gunnar Nelson at his best. I truly believe it was a sensational performance, and it really is just going to be onward and upward now for the Iceland product. I think from here, the fight that makes the most sense is probably a fight with Neil Magny. Neil Magny, of course, is coming off a victory, a TKO victory himself over Hector Lombard, our very own adopted Aussie in Brizzy. And basically everyone else up the pointy end of the welterweight division at the moment is booked. We found out just recently that Robbie Lawler is going to be defending his welterweight championship against Tyron Woodley at UFC 201. UFC 200 sees Johnny Hendricks taking on Kelvin Gastelum. We've already got Stephen Wonderboy Thompson taking on Rory McDonald in Canada in just a few weeks. The whisperings online that Carlos Condit is going to be welcoming Nick Diaz back to the octagon. Again, that is just speculation at this point, but if that is true, everyone else is pretty much booked. So I think a fight between Gunnar Nelson and Neil Magny would be an absolute cracker. So stay tuned for any news that might develop there. And then from there, we moved on to the heavyweights. And the big Dutchman, Stefan Struve, taking on Antonio Bigfoot Silva. And it was just a demolition. Struve KO'd Bigfoot in just 16 seconds into the first round. It's a worry for Bigfoot. I know, as I said last week, he can fight for as long as he wants to fight. But he has been knocked out a lot in recent times. And again, I said it on last week's episode, you never want to see, as a fan, you never want to see someone stick around too long. And I love Bigfoot Silva. He always comes to fight. I was in Vegas the night he knocked out Alistair Overeem, and it's one of the loudest reactions I've ever heard. But, it was a great night for Stefan Struve. Where he goes from here, I'd like to see him fight Ben Rothwell. I know it would be, a big leap up in competition. I think it's fair to say. I know Rothwell's coming off a loss to Junior Dos Santos, but I think it would still be a good matchup for Stefan Struve to see where he fits in the heavyweight picture, coming off such a big win and such an emphatic win over Bigfoot Silva. From there, we moved to the main event, and it was Alistair Overeem taking on Andrei Arlovski, two of the best heavyweights in the world, and it was just, at the very beginning of the first round, I thought Arlovski was going to do him. He came out hard, and looked like he might have been about to get the finish, but ultimately it was Reem that picked up the TKO with a front kick to the face, followed up by punches, which is insane from a heavyweight. And we did find out pretty much straight after that Alistair Overeem will be next in line for the heavyweight championship. He will fight the winner of this weekend's main event at UFC 198 for the heavyweight strap, which proves that once again I know absolutely nothing, because I've been saying for weeks that I truly believe that Cain Velasquez would get the next shot at the belt if he was successful over Travis Brown at UFC 200. But no, Alistair Overeem will get the next crack finally, because it seems like he's been so close to challenge him for the belt on so many occasions, and it's finally going to happen. So a massive congratulations to Alistair Overeem, and indeed all of the winners from last weekend's UFC Fight Night Rotterdam. And now we move forward, and it's been a huge week in MMA news. First of all, and a massive disappointment, I was absolutely gutted to hear that Anderson Silva has had to withdraw from UFC 198. I know it seems like it wouldn't be a UFC pay-per-view without a big fight dropping off, but it was a pretty serious illness. Anderson actually had to have his gallbladder removed, so we do wish him a very speedy recovery, and all the best to Anderson Silva. Unfortunately, that does mean that Uriah Hall has also dropped off the card. He was offered another fight, or there were reports that they were seeking a replacement for him, but he chose to sit out. So who knows? Maybe he will fight Anderson when Anderson is fit and healthy. So there's been a little bit of a reshuffle for UFC 198, and we will get to that in just a little while. And speaking of this weekend, if you just can't bloody wait until Sunday to get your fix of MMA, Brace MMA, an Aussie organisation, one of the premier MMA organisations in Australia, their fights are streaming live now on UFC Fight Pass. If you don't have it, what are you doing? So sign up for Fight Pass. It's only $10 a month, and you can check out Brace 40 from the Gold Coast this Saturday afternoon at midday Australian Eastern Standard Time. Check it out. You won't be disappointed. Also, in other withdrawal news, Dennis Seaver has had to pull out of his upcoming UFC 199 fight with the legend, the prodigy, the greatest of all time, BJ Penn. But the good news is BJ is staying on the card. He will be taking on late replacement Cole Miller, who most famously or infamously, you might remember, was scheduled to fight Conor McGregor back in 2014 and had to withdraw from that fight due to an injury, which is interesting when you consider that a lot of the knock on Conor has been whether or not he can hang on the ground with elite grapplers. Everyone was quick to point out that he was submitted by Joe Duffy back in Cage Warriors in the UK, and most recently, obviously, his fight with Nate Diaz, where he was submitted in the second round. And Cole Miller is a really, really high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. So it's interesting, if that fight happens in 2014, Cole Miller submits Conor, who knows where we'd be today. But Cole Miller withdrew from the fight, and obviously now Conor went on to become a megastar. But it's fun sometimes to just think about what could have been. Cole Miller hasn't fought since December of 2015, so he'll be coming up on 6 months by the time he fights BJ. That fight ended in a no contest when he was accidentally poked in the eye by Jim Eilers and unable to continue. But good on Cole Miller for jumping up, and awesome that we're still going to see the great BJ Penn back in the octagon in just a few weeks' time. Also, other fight announcements from this week. The rematch between TJ Dillashaw and Rafael Assunção is locked in for UFC 200 in July. Of course, they fought for the first time back in 2013. Assunção picked up a split decision victory over the now former UFC bantamweight champion. So, great matchup in the UFC bantamweight division, and in my opinion, which we've already established means nothing when you consider the Cain Velasquez. Anyway, it could very well determine the number one contender for the UFC bantamweight championship to fight the winner of Dominic Cruz and Uriah Faber. So keep an eye out there. High stakes matchup coming up at UFC 200. In other news that was announced just today, the Ultimate Fighter Season 24 will feature two of the top flyweight fighters in the world, in Joseph Benavidez and Henry Cejudo as coaches. They will fight at the finale in December, but also a very, very cool new wrinkle for the Ultimate Fighter. We have been discussing here on the show, and it's been doing the rounds online, that the winner of the Ultimate Fighter Season 24 would be challenging Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson for the UFC Flyweight Championship. We have found out now that the tournament is going to be comprised of champions from other organizations. So flyweight champions from other regional promotions and international promotions will come together in one tournament to determine the new number one contender. I think this is a very, very cool twist on a show that's been around a long time. It's still great. I'm watching, the tough season now with Claudia Gadelha and Joanna Jędrzejczyk as a coach. So I think it's bloody good. But, some people maybe are starting to get a little bit sick of it, and after 23 seasons now, it's no wonder why. But I think it's cool. It adds something different, and we're going to get a new contender and hopefully a new star in the flyweight division, which can only be a good thing. Also, in massive news this week, and it is just a rumor according to UFC President Dana White, but some online reports are suggesting that Zuffa is about to sell the UFC, which would be absolutely incredible. It would change MMA as we know it. Online reports suggest that UFC is in the advanced stages of being sold to a China-based media and real estate company for somewhere between $3.5 and $4 billion. That's billion with a B. As the story goes, Zuffa purchased the UFC back in 2001 for just $2 million. So that's some sort of return. Next time one of your mates comes to you with a stupid idea and you think, mate, you're an idiot, get out of my way. Yeah, they might be worth having a listen to, because it could turn $2 million into $4 billion if you're anything like Zuffa. Dana White came out just yesterday, as of the recording of the podcast, and said there's absolutely no truth to the rumour, which, could very well mean that there'll be an announcement that it has been sold yesterday. If it's anything like sport in Australia, whenever a footy team is, doing nothing and the chairman of a team comes out and says that the coach has got the full backing of the board, it's usually a sign that he's going to get the arse in the next day or two. So we'll keep you posted with any news that might break there. But yeah, it would be bizarre to see the UFC run by anyone but Zuffa at this stage. Would that mean that Dana would no longer be president? I mean, if you own the company, you can bring in your own staff. Would that mean the end of those crappy Reebok uniforms? Who knows? But we'll keep you posted if anything breaks. Speaking of Dana, he also weighed in on the seemingly never-ending rumour of Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather. Dana came out and said it's not happening. Conor is under contract with the UFC, but if Floyd wants to fight Conor, then he should call me being Dana White. Which would suggest that Dana is saying, if it's going to happen, mate, it should happen in the octagon. Again, and I said it last week, and I really think it is highly, highly unlikely that this fight would ever happen. But if it was ever to take place and the stars were to align, I think the octagon is the perfect place for it to happen, as opposed to having just a straight boxing match. If it's a boxing match, you know Floyd is going to have a heavy advantage. Whereas if it's in the octagon, it allows both guys to use all of their tools. Floyd can still use all of his boxing, but it allows Conor to use all of his many years of martial arts training in what would be more than a boxing match. It would be a fight. And if we wanted to find out who the better fighter was, then the octagon's the perfect place to do it. As I said, I really don't think it will happen, but you know, you never say never. There's a chance for a lot of people to make a lot of money. When the story first broke, the report suggested that Floyd was set to make $100 million and Conor was only set to make $7 million. That was the first red flag. If you were going to have a fight that was going to generate that much revenue, there is no way in this world Conor McGregor would sign on for $7 million if Floyd was making $100 million. Especially when you consider that Conor was set to make $10 million for UFC 200. So he'd be taking a pay cut for starters. There's no doubt in my mind, if in a perfect world this fight was to take place, it would smash the pay-per-view record set by Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. I truly believe that, because you'd have all the eyes of the boxing world, you would have all of the eyes of the MMA world, and you would just have casual sport fans tuning in to see what all of the fuss was about. It would be absolutely gigantic. So will it happen? Probably not. But it's fun to fantasy book. Who would win in a fight between Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather? You might as well say who'd win in a fight between a dolphin and a wombat, which in itself would be a super fight. Trust me, I've thought about it. I love this kind of stuff. You got a dolphin, natural headbutter, can fend off a shark attack just by using its head. You got a wombat who refuses to be knocked down. I know people that have hit wombats in their cars and the wombats have just waddled away. You got a natural headbutter and an animal that you can't knock down with a headbutt. It's your classic unstoppable force meets the immovable object. Put that on pay-per-view, I'd slam down $50. But, if we do get any word on Conor and Floyd, unlikely as it may be, we will let you know. But Dana also said in his most recent media appearance that he is meeting with Conor this week, and there could be an announcement as early as next week on his next UFC fight. As I suggested last week on the show, rumblings are that Conor will still fight Nate Diaz, and it will be the main event of UFC 202, August 21, Australian time. So stay tuned. We'll keep you posted as soon as something's official. We move now on to this weekend's gigantic UFC 198. It emanates from Brazil. It sold out 45,000 tickets in just a matter of hours, and it is absolutely stacked from top to bottom. It's just an incredible card, and we are in for an absolute treat. Things kick off on the UFC Fight Pass prelims with some sensational fights, but the featured prelim will see Patrick Cummins taking on Rogerio Nogueira, Little Nog. It's a bit of a must-win for both fighters, you would have to think. Little Nog's coming off back-to-back losses to Anthony Rumble Johnson and Shogun Rua, who's also featured on the card. But, he's got some high-profile wins in the UFC too. He's got a win over Tito Ortiz and also a win over Rashad Evans. I was at that fight. It was in Las Vegas, UFC 156, when Jose Aldo took on Frankie Edgar in the main event. It wasn't the most eventful fight, but, a win's a win. For Pat Cummins, he's lost 2 of his last 3. Most recently, a loss to Glover Teixeira, but he has got a win over Fazio, who of course is a former Strikeforce champion. So a must-win fight for both guys, and definitely very entertaining. Fingers crossed, if nothing else. We move to the prelim card on Fox Sports. John Lineker on the card, Francisco Trinaldo's on the card, Thiago Santos has taken on Nate Marquardt, and in the featured prelim on Fox Sports, an absolutely sensational welterweight bout between Damian Maia and Matt Brown. Damian Maia is already one of my favourite fighters, but I just love his approach to fighting. You look at the guy and he doesn't look like an intimidating sort of a fighter, but that dude is a badass of the highest degree. He's just incredible. I truly believe he is the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner ever to have competed in mixed martial arts. He's coming off a 4-fight win streak. Most recently, a decision win over Gunnar Nelson. He also, in one of his most recent fights, just put on an absolute grappling clinic versus Neil Magny. It really was a thing of beauty. If you haven't seen it yet, check it out. It's just great. Matt Brown is a sensational story himself. He put together a 7-fight win streak with wins over top contenders like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He beat Eric Silva in one of my favourite fights of all time. It's probably one of my top 5 favourite fights. What are the other fights in my top 5? Stay tuned. We might talk about it in another episode. But he has lost 2 of his last 3. But those 2 losses were to the best of the best. One to current welterweight champion Robbie Lawler, and the second to Johnny Hendricks, a former champion in his own right. Most recently coming off a win over Tim Means, but it has been almost a year since he was in the octagon. So plenty of variables in this fight. I think if Damian Maia picks up the win, he's got to be in the conversation to get a crack at the winner of Robbie Lawler and Tyron Woodley. I think it would be absolutely a huge missed opportunity if the UFC were not to look at Damian Maia seriously as a contender if he picks up the win on the weekend, which is much easier said than done because Matt Brown is tough as nails and so much fun to watch fight. So we move to the main card now. And of course, with the withdrawal of Anderson Silva and the scrapping of his fight with Uriah Hall, it's caused a little bit of a shuffle to the main card. Wiley Alves and Brian Barberino moved to the main card now. Of course, Barberino most recently picked up a win over Sage Northcutt. So the boys get a huge opportunity here with a whole lot of eyeballs on them, and I'm sure they'll take full advantage. And then we move to Shogun, who are the legend. Just an absolute, he really is a legend in every sense of the word, taking on an up-and-comer in Corey Anderson. For Shogun, he has lost 5 of his last 8. We can't forget that. But he's coming off a win in his most recent fight against Rogerio Nogueira. His losses in his last 3 were to Dan Henderson and Ovin St. Preux. Hendo scoring the knockout. OSP also a pretty huge knockout win. So, when these veterans start losing these fights by knockout, it's a little bit of a worry. But as long as he's winning fights and he's in there having a go, I truly believe that these legends of the sport, as long as they're not putting themselves at too much risk, truly have earned the right to fight for as long as they want to. And if Shogun wants to keep fighting, all the very best of luck to him. Corey Anderson has nothing to lose in this fight. He's on a 3-fight win streak. He's got wins over Jan Blachowicz, Fabio Maldonado, and Filthy Tom Lawler. But you'd have to say reasonably that Shogun is a big step up in competition. Former Pride Grand Prix winner, former UFC light heavyweight champion, and just a great spotlight for both guys. And you can be guaranteed that Shogun's going to try and put on a show in front of a rowdy Brazilian crowd, and hopefully he can pull off something special. Which then moves us to one of the most highly anticipated debuts that I can ever remember in the history of the UFC, in Chris Cyborg finally entering the octagon. She'll be welcomed by Leslie Smith, who, of course, is coming off a win over Rin Nakai in Brisbane back in March. But Cyborg is just something totally different. To put things into perspective, when you consider Ronda Rousey, who many people would consider to be the best women's MMA fighter of all time. Certainly, I think she's the most important because she opened the door for the UFC, allowing women to compete. And all of the amazing female fighters that we now have in the octagon is in huge part. Ronda was responsible for that. But her entire run from when she entered the octagon to when she lost to Holly Holm was not quite 3 years. Chris Cyborg is an 11-year veteran and is just incredible to watch. She's the current Invicta featherweight champion. This fight will be at 140-pound catchweight. She's finished every opponent since 2008. Her most famous win, most likely, was over Gina Carano back in 2009. For people that don't know, Gina Carano was kind of the Ronda Rousey of the day. Certainly not necessarily from an athletic point, but she was a very talented fighter in her own right. She was absolutely gorgeous. She was the face of women's MMA, and she was a superstar. She was, if you didn't know anything else about MMA, you knew who Gina Carano was. And then along came Cyborg, and it did not end well for Gina Carano. Cyborg is a machine. It's been such a long time, her coming to the UFC. For years, the argument was, we just don't have a division for her. But really, these days, it doesn't matter. If there's someone that's willing to fight her at catchweight, which Leslie Smith absolutely is because she's tough as nails, why not throw her in there? We've seen it a million times. Some of the most famous and most entertaining fights in UFC history haven't been title fights. So it really doesn't matter. And I'm so excited to finally see Cyborg in the octagon. If you've never seen a fight, you are absolutely in for a treat. And that's not to say that Leslie Smith is going to be, anything but a tough out. When she fought Jessica Eye, her bloody ear was hanging off and she was trying to keep fighting. There's no quit in Leslie Smith. So she's the perfect opponent to welcome Cyborg to the octagon, and we are absolutely the beneficiaries of something that could be absolutely incredible. So from there, we move on to the co-main event of the evening, Ronaldo Jacare Souza taking on Vitor Belfort. Jacare is, in my opinion, consensus one of the top 2 or 3 best middleweights in the world. There's no doubt about it. High-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Recently had an 8-fight winning streak snapped in a controversial fight against Yoel Romero. Romero picked up a split decision in a fight that many people, myself included, thought that Jacare won. And then Romero flagged for a banned substance. So it's highly likely that even though he is coming off a loss, a win here would definitely put him in the driver's seat as far as the next shot at the UFC's middleweight championship against the winner of Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman in June. But first, he's got to get through Vitor Belfort. Vitor's won 4 of his last 5. His only loss was against then-champion Chris Weidman in a losing effort for the belt. His most recent win was over Dan Henderson, who it seems like he fights every second weekend. But another sensational performance over Hendo. And the interesting thing here is that Vitor could also put himself straight into the driver's seat if he is to pick up a win on Sunday. He's got history with Luke Rockhold, who's the current UFC middleweight champion. He beat Luke Rockhold back in 2013, knocked him out with a devastating head kick. Rockhold has thrown accusations towards Vitor. His use of testosterone is well documented. And Luke Rockhold truly believes if he's not fighting a juiced up Vitor Belfort, he would smash him. Vitor still thinks he's got what it takes to beat Luke Rockhold. The story writes itself. So if Rockhold gets over Weidman and Vitor gets over Jacare, we could see the rematch definitely with a pretty important bit of I've forgotten what I'm saying. I'm just so bloody excited about UFC 198. Fair dinkum. Jacare and Vitor in the co-main event, and that of course brings us to the big boys, the UFC heavyweights, and a heavyweight title fight between Fabricio Verdum and Stipe Miocic. Miocic has won 5 of his last 6, including, and as much as it hurts my heart to even admit it, a demolition of Mark Hunt. He's also got wins over Roy Big Country Nelson and Andrei Arlovsky. His only loss during that run was a razor-thin split decision loss to Junior Dos Santos, and he has well and truly earned this opportunity against Fabricio Verdum. Verdum is on a 6-fight win streak of his own. He himself has got a win over Mark Hunt, over Big Country, over Travis Brown, and most recently defeated Cain Velasquez for the heavyweight championship of the world. It's an interesting matchup. Fabricio, for a long time, it seems like he's been fighting forever. And for a long time, he was just one of those guys that was there or thereabouts. And then all of a sudden, something clicked. And in recent years, he's looked like a completely different fighter. I think if someone had told me 5 or 6 years ago that in 2016, Fabricio Verdum would be the UFC heavyweight champion, I would have thought they were crazy. But ever since that win over Fedor, he's just been on another level. His striking has improved incredibly, and he's always been one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners ever to compete in MMA. In Stipe Miocic, you have a high-level athlete with a ridiculous gas tank and serious knockout power. I love going into a fight where you truly can't pick who's going to win. Will it be the experience and the all-around game of Fabricio Verdum, or will it be the power and athleticism of Stipe Miocic? either way, we are in for an absolute treat. UFC 198 is ridiculous. We already know that the winner of Verdum and Miocic will face Alistair Overeem, so we already have that to look forward to. And if you want to check it out, this Sunday morning, 8:30 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, the UFC Fight Pass prelims kick off. The preliminary card kicks off on Fox Sports at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the main card kicks off at 12 p.m. on Main Event. If you want to watch it, you're going to have to throw down 50 sheets, but I think it'll absolutely be worth it. So with that said, thank you so much for joining us for another edition of the Big Bad Brad Show MMA. You can find us at facebook.com/Big Bad Brad MMA. You can find us on Twitter at Big Bad Brad MMA, and you can also find us on YouTube. Just search Big Bad Brad Show MMA and you'll be able to find us. No worries at all. Thank you so much for checking out the show. Enjoy Brace MMA on Saturday. Enjoy UFC 198 on Sunday, and I will catch you next time.